Well, good evening, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Nathan, if you look out there in the parking lot, anybody straggling around, give a high sign that we're going in here. Okay. So I guess I'll give the official welcome. My name is Chris Cray. I'm the Assistant Chief of the Game and Furbear Program in the agency. I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what we're going to do tonight. We'll start with some introductions. We've got a really good team of folks assembled to answer basically any and all questions about chronic wasting disease. A lot of folks here in green shirts. I'm not going to try to name everyone. A lot of important jobs here. But I will mention, those of you know that the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission is overseen by a 19-member board of commissioners. That's the very top level of the commission. We are fortunate tonight to have our District 7 Commissioner, Mr. Jim Ruffins, here. Jim, appreciate you coming out. He's basically top dog in the room. We also got a lot of our biologists that are very much in touch with the disease, understanding deer biology and chronic wasting disease. We've got a lot of our wildlife technicians that are here. They're really down in the weeds to help put a lot of this sampling and testing into play. We've got a lot of our enforcement officers here as well. They've got a vital role to play. So I'm saying all that to kind of point out that if you have a question, please don't leave here tonight without that question getting answered. We have a program to go over several different things. Probably take us 45 minutes or so, maybe a little longer to kind of go through it. There's a lot to cover. We're going to start out with a 4 or 5 minute video that we produced. It's really nice. It overviews chronic wasting disease very well. From that, we're going to transition into James Tomlin. He is your regional supervisor here for all the private land operations we have in this part of the state. He's going to go over sort of chronic wasting disease and what it means to a deer and deer biology, really make a connection there to understanding that disease. Then, unfortunately, you're going to have to listen to me a little bit more. But I'm going to go over what the new rules that are in place, the new regulations. Try to really provide the details on that, not just tell you what the rules are, but try to connect that to what James is telling us about biology and about chronic wasting disease. What do we want these rules to do for us? And then we're really going to get down in the weeds. James and Jason Smith. Jason works here locally as our district biologist. They're going to basically just pull up the website that we have, this No CWD website. You can find basically all the up-to-date stuff that we have in the agency, rules, regulations, places to get deer tested, all that kind of stuff. We're just going to bring that website up and kind of walk you through it, show you what's there so you know how to find it. Okay, I think that's everything. James is going to start our video for us. Appreciate everybody coming out tonight. Thank you.
And the one thing that I'll add to that is you may have seen these posters around the room. So if you are successful hunting this season, the Wildlife Commission wants to hear from you about your experience with getting your deer tested, either why you did, why you didn't, and we're trying to learn as much as we can about how to make that as easy as possible on our hunters. So you should have gotten a little note card, business card in your packet when you walked in there. That's got a QR code on it, so after you harvest, if you're able to harvest a deer this year, you can access that survey, do it online on your phone, and we appreciate your feedback on that. So as Chris mentioned, this video was in cooperation, partnership with Chris Douglas at Carolina All Out. And so we're going to get that going here.
Chronic wasting disease, or CWD, is the biggest disease threat to North Carolina's white-tailed deer population and our state's rich deer hunting heritage. CWD affects deer and related species such as elk, moose, and caribou. It spreads easily and is always fatal. CWD is a slow killer. It takes over a year for an infected deer to show visible signs of illness. This can appear as listlessness or lack of coordination, excessive urination and drooling, and a severe decline in body weight. By the time these signs appear, death is near. CWD is spread easily between deer through direct contact in their environment and is caused by abnormal proteins or prions that slowly build up in a deer's nervous system, eventually causing brain damage and death. There is no vaccine, treatment, or cure. CWD prions are shed in an infected animal's saliva, urine, and body tissues well before the animal starts to show any signs of sickness. Prions are spread as deer move through their environment and can hitchhike to new locations when people transport infected animals, their carcasses, or high-risk parts. Once in the environment, these prions can last in the soil for decades. They can survive fire and freezing temperatures and still infect new deer. Fortunately, CWD prions don't seem to cause sickness in humans, at least for now, but the closely related prions that cause mad cow disease have shown they can infect humans. What can we do now that CWD has been detected in North Carolina? Hunters, cooperators, and wildlife officials must work together to slow the spread. In states that have had CWD the longest, hunters are already seeing its negative impact, including fewer deer, fewer mature bucks, and harvested animals that shouldn't be consumed. In some areas of these states, over half of the adult bucks tested are positive for CWD. Hunters in these areas are facing the reality that their hunting traditions will never be the same. Hunters can do their part by following North Carolina's carcass importation laws. It is against the law to import whole deer carcasses or high-risk parts. When importing carcass parts into the state, only transport deboned meat and finished mounts, hides, or skulls with all other tissues removed. All imported parts must be labeled with your name, address, hunting license number, the state or county where the animal was harvested, and the date of harvest. Whenever possible, field dress deer at the site of harvest and dispose of unused parts so they are out of reach for deer and scavengers. If you see something, say something. Reporting illegal importation of live deer, whole carcasses, and high-risk parts helps keep CWD from spreading to new areas. The best tool we have to fight CWD is knowing where it is and slowing its spread. There is no reliable live test for CWD, so finding it on the landscape means testing animals once they're dead, including hunter harvests. The North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission is making it more convenient for hunters to help by adding more locations where they can donate a tissue sample from their harvest. CWD testing drop-off stations allow hunters to make donations at any time. Donating a deer head is fast and easy. If you have a successful hunt this season, please do your part to help find and manage CWD. Together we can fight this threat to our white-tailed deer and help preserve North Carolina's hunting tradition for generations to come. For more information about North Carolina's CWD monitoring efforts, including where you can donate a sample, visit ncwildlife.org/CWD.
So, appreciate everybody being here tonight and joining us online. You know, we want to really stress the importance tonight of this disease and its potential impact on our deer herd here in North Carolina, particularly in Yadkin and surrounding counties, but also what it means for the future. And so a lot of times when it comes to talking about CWD, there's a good bit of doom and gloom that goes along with that conversation. But it is important. It does matter what we do now that we are CWD positive for those future generations of hunters, that we maintain a strong hunting heritage and a good deer population. So I just want to kind of preface this information with that you know, when you're out this season, you're going to see deer. Hopefully you're going to harvest a few deer. Hopefully you harvest a couple more than you might already would have in years past, because we do need those samples. But you're not going to see deer falling down and dying from CWD this season. That's not how this disease works in deer. And so our deer biologist, Mariah Bogus, usually gives this program. This is his talk, and he does a fantastic job with it. Unfortunately, he's not able to be with us tonight, so you guys stuck with me. So we're going to start just looking at the current known distribution of chronic wasting disease across of the white-tailed deer's range. And it was initially observed back in the 60s out in Colorado, and over the last decades, you can see how that spread has occurred from the western part of the U.S., up into Canada, down into Texas, across the Mississippi, and now here in Yadkin County in North Carolina. We are the 30th state to detect CWD, and we are fortunate in that respect in that there has been a lot learned over that course of time on what works, what doesn't work when it comes to managing this disease. And so we are fortunate in that respect that we can glean from other states and hopefully clear any early hurdles and make things go a little bit more successfully with our management. So let's talk a little bit about one common disease here in North Carolina, hemorrhagic disease, also commonly known as blue tongue, and compare that and contrast it with chronic wasting disease. So hemorrhagic disease is caused by a virus. It's transferred by a biting edge or an oceal. It's cyclical in its outbreaks or its viral activity, and it's seasonal in when it occurs during the year. And we've had some activity with hemorrhagic virus this year across the state, and certainly here around Yadkin and Surrey, Forsyth, and on into the Piedmont. We've had some activity and some positive cases of hemorrhagic virus across the state this year. Deer are able to handle that virus. Like I said, it's cyclical in how it behaves. It's been in the southeast as long as we've had records of deer in the southeast. So they have evolved over time with it. They can handle the impacts of the virus. One key thing is that not all deer die from hemorrhagic virus. Some survive and they develop immunity to it, and that provides protection in that local deer herd from future outbreaks of that viral activity. And even when we do have some significant viral activity with hemorrhagics, deer populations can rebound pretty quickly. It's probably somewhat fresh in everyone's mind, the outbreak of 2012 that we had along the Blue Ridge Escarpment. We had some pretty good activity in Yadkin and northern Iredell County in 2016. So, it's something that hunters have had experience with over the years. It's very visible. You see dead deer, you smell them this time of year, or late summer, early fall, very visible. But deer can handle that activity and they can rebound relatively quickly. CWD is very different. It's caused by a prion, which is a misfolded protein. It's not alive. You can't kill it. It's not a bacteria. It's not a fungus. It's a protein. As we saw with the previous slide, it's spreading across the country, whereas hemorrhagics has been documented here for a long, long time. But CWD is currently continuing to spread. It's a constant pressure on the population. So it's not cyclical in its activity or how it impacts those local deer herds. It's constant pressure and typically downward pressure on that local population. It has a 100% mortality rate. If the deer gets infected with CWD, it's going to die. It's just a matter of time. And we've seen from a lot of states out west that have been dealing with this disease for way longer than we have here in the Mid-Atlantic or Southeast, that if you allow prevalence rates to go unchecked and can't manage that disease, those populations will decline. So we all have kind of seen some pictures of what CWD looks like, and this is probably what comes to people's mind. Very emaciated, bony, listless, drooling, just very poor condition, and as the name implies, that wasting condition, where they lose that drive or desire to forage. It's a neurological disease, affects the nervous system, and they lose that drive to forage, and that's what leads to that wasting condition. So that's kind of what jumps in our minds a lot when we think about CWD, but in reality, this can be what CWD looks like on the ground too, due to the disease's incubation period. So once that deer is exposed to those infected prions, that infectious agent, it can take up to 16 months before it begins to, or that particular deer begins to exhibit symptoms of the disease. So those prions are building in that deer's body systems over that course of time, but not expressing any outward symptoms of what's going on inside. But that whole period of time, they are spreading those prions out into the environment through saliva, feces, urine, those kinds of excretions. So slow incubation period, you can't tell what's going on with that deer, that deer's positive. There's no reliable live test. The only, as the video mentioned, the only way to test deer is to test them after they've passed away or died. And we extract those lymph nodes to test. So after that 16-month time frame, then that prion load is to the point where it's beginning to deteriorate the brain, and that deer begins to then show symptoms of the disease in that wasting condition. And at that point, very late stage of the disease and death is fairly imminent within a couple of months. So Mariah put this animation together. It's really, really well done. So we're going to walk through this, and so that you can see that red knot there in that deer's neck. That's where those lymph nodes reside that we're testing. And we test those because the prion load builds up in those particular lymph nodes first. And so that's our best tissue to test with enough sensitivity to give us a reliable answer as early as we can get it. So the prion load begins to build up there in the deer. After a few months, it begins to spread to the rest of the lymphatic system. A little bit more time, it begins to impact the brain and the rest of the nervous system, and then it begins to build into the gut and the intestines. So at this point in time, we're getting close to that 12 to 16 month period, or 9 month period, where it's in all the major bodily systems of that deer. And so here we go with our saliva, infected prions in the saliva out on the ground, in the feces, and also as that deer urinates on the landscape. So you think about that period, that incubation period of time, as that deer is moving and carrying about its life out on the landscape. It's doing a whole lot of excreting during that period of time and putting prions out on the landscape. And those prions are infectious in the environment. So this disease is spread by direct contact, and also when that environment gets contaminated by these prions. And we know through research that those prions can stay viable in the soil for decades, up to decades. So why does this matter? Well, CWD is a slow, permanent disease. Once it's there, it's there, due to the ability for it to contaminate the environment and to infect deer by simply coming across that contaminated environment. CWD prevalence will increase. You know, we only have 2 positive cases that we've detected here in Yadkin County. We hope to test a whole lot of deer over the next few years and to be able to determine what the prevalence rate is, so we can determine where it is and how bad it is. And those prevalence rates generally do increase. And if they increase beyond a certain point, a certain threshold, then deer lifespans begin to decrease. So if you think about that period, that incubation period and the course of this disease, we're talking about 18 to 24 months, 2 years old. So if that is the course of the disease, and we've seen this in other states, then our deer population will change. It's not going to go away, but our deer population will change in that age structure. So let's dive into that just a little bit and talk about does and offspring with fawns. So our average fawn recruitment rate here in North Carolina is about 50%, and that's pretty typical for a southeastern deer herd. So what that means is that it takes a doe 2 years. If she has 1 fawn a year, it takes her 2 years just to replace her sheep. So if that particular doe is having a shorter lifespan due to the effects of chronic wasting disease, and she's succumbing to the disease, between 2 and 3 years, she's barely replacing herself in that local deer herd. So you run that on out far enough, it may take decades, but that's where some areas of the country and certain mule deer populations are starting to see pretty big declines in their deer herds. So if we look at North Carolina's adult deer age structure, this is a snapshot of the percentage of adult harvest. What we really want to pay attention to in this slide is that 3.5 plus age group. And so if we get shorter lifespans in our deer herd due to the prevalence of this disease, then it's really going to start chipping away at that 3.5 plus age group. And so you lose a lot of those older mature deer, which in relative to the doe segment of the herd, those are the best producers. Their prime production years, 2.5 to 6.5, but if they're dying between 2.5 and 3.5, then your population growth is really going to be really low. So it's we're very concerned about it due to the potential impacts that it can have on the deer herd long term. And we know that it can happen because it's been documented in other areas. So what do we know about the disease here in North Carolina? So we know that the first detection we had was a 2.5-year-old buck. It was killed in northern Yadkin County. When we got the positive result back on that deer, we were able to collect some DNA from the skull of the mount that that particular hunter had done on that buck. And our staff matched the DNA from that skull with the DNA from the sample that tested positive at the lab in Wisconsin. So it's 100% that deer that tested positive was killed on that farm in northern Yadkin County. No question. Our second positive detection was a 2.5-year-old doe that was killed under a depredation permit on a farm less than a mile away from our first detection. So that's what we do. What we don't know is how bad it is in that part of the county or southern Surrey. We don't know how bad the disease is, and we don't know how far and wide it's spread. We don't know how it's contained. I'm sure most folks in the room understand deer dispersal. More than 50% of our yearling males or yearling bucks disperse when they're about 17, 18 months old, about right now. And so those, average dispersal distances for a yearling buck is about 5 miles. But it's been documented they can go up to 30 miles. So you take that, the ecology of the critter into consideration there, where that deer pulled that we tested, that tested positive, that deer could have been 5 miles away a month before that period of time. We just do not know the answer to that. So we've got to do a lot of testing to really understand where this disease is. And we don't know how it got to Yadkin County, and we likely will never know the answer to that question. Plenty of time for speculation and rolling it around in your head on how it got there. We just likely will never know. So we've got to focus on answering those first 2 bullets there. Where is it and how bad is it? And so that's what we're here to talk about tonight and what our approach is over the next couple of years. And our Board of Commissioners approved our CWD response plan back in the summer of 2021. That was developed by our staff and the North Carolina Department of Agriculture staff to really guide our steps on how we would respond if we detected CWD in North Carolina. And so here comes March 2022 when we get our first positive and we're off and running. And what Chris is going to come up and talk to you about are the special regulations that came out of that response plan and our initial actions that were guided by that plan that is really geared toward helping us answer those first 2 bullets, which is know where it is and know how bad it is. And there's two other really important points there, and that's, don't give it a ride. That's kind of one of our taglines that we're really trying to get out and make it a part of the hunting community verbiage, I guess. Just really stress the importance of how easy it is to spread this disease by simply putting it in the back of the truck and hauling it down the road. We really want to keep it contained to where it is now. The worst thing we want to do is put it in the back of the truck, haul it 5 counties away, and now we've got a new hot spot or a potential positive situation in another part of the state and threaten another part of our deer herd. So the disease can be moved through live deer, so fawn rehabilitation is a concern, and that's a part of those regulations that Chris is going to talk to us about, and also dead deer, just like we did talk about. And then the other thing we want to do is slow transmission rates. So again, this disease spreads through direct contact and contaminated environment, and so unnecessarily congregating deer around food sources and things like that is one step we can take to help slow transmission rates between those two. But one thing we've really got to do over the next couple of years is test a lot of deer to answer some of these questions that we have. So I'll turn it over to Chris.
Okay, thanks, James. Appreciate that. 2 things before I jump into these regulations I should mention just to start with. Just so you'll know, we are being broadcast live through Facebook, which is wonderful. I appreciate everybody coming out in person, but I know we've got some folks watching at home. That's great as well. And to line up with that a little bit, I know James and I are hitting y'all with a lot of information. When we run across something that didn't make sense, you didn't understand what we're saying, you have a follow-up question, jot it down on that card that folks gave you on the way in here in a little bit. When we get near the end, we'll actually gather those cards up and we'll kind of take some time here for our folks to sort them together and get a really good answer to each question, each and every question. So that's kind of what we'll do as we wrap up toward the end. My job for the next 15 minutes or so, as James kind of teed up there, is to talk about the 5 broad areas of new regulations, new rules that are in place, not just exactly what they require people to do or not do, but where we're hoping to get with that. So we're going to touch on fawn rehabilitation. We're going to talk about baiting and feeding. We've also got to talk about the risk that deer urine or those other types of attractants can present. We've got to talk about CWD testing, a little bit more detail on what that means and why it's important. And then finally, we want to wrap up with that carcass transportation, not giving it a ride. It's really, really important. Before we go to each of those 5, we need to talk about surveillance areas. You're going to hear that term a bunch here when it comes to the rules. There are 2 kinds of surveillance areas. So on the left side of the screen is what you might hear called the secondary surveillance area. That's touching all or parts of 8 counties. That's roughly a 30-mile radius around where those 2 positive samples came from. And if you remember a few minutes ago, what James talked about, the biology of deer themselves, just the straight up facts about deer, is dispersing deer when they're basically teenagers. When they grow into adulthood, they oftentimes leave their home range. They strike out and set up a new place. That can be as much as 30 miles away. So that's the reason for a 30-mile surveillance area. But more typical is dispersal distances in a 5-mile zone. So that's what you're seeing on the right-hand side. That's that smaller primary surveillance area. That's roughly a 5-mile radius around where those positive samples were. Again, that's tied strictly to the deer biology. That's where the first 2 showed up. Does that mean that's the primary spot? Not necessarily, but it's probably the best guess to where we should look most intensively to start with. The rules, as we go through the rules, they're going to differ. There are a few places where they differ between the secondary area and the primary area, and I want to point those out as we go on. There also are some management options, some different tools we might have in the toolbox within that primary zone, just to understand our audience a little bit. How many folks do we have here tonight that either hunt or live in that primary surveillance area? Okay, I'm seeing a few hands around the room. So kind of hold your hand up, James. I know we'll want to chat with some of you folks later as we kind of get into details of surveillance. Thank you. Appreciate y'all coming out tonight. I live actually quite close to the primary zone myself. I am a deer hunter myself. I hope this was a talk and a presentation I never have to give, but I feel like I am in the same boat with everybody else in a lot of ways. All right, so we've had a number of folks over many, many years that have poured their heart and soul into rehabilitating young fawns in the spring of the year. And the unfortunate reality, one of those really inconvenient things about CWD is that actually presents a pretty big risk to moving CWD around. We collect fawns and move them to a rehabilitator in a different area. That is a lot of risk for moving CWD around. So we've had to prohibit, the agency in our response plan has had to prohibit fawn rehabilitation within that broader secondary surveillance zone. And that ties back to that don't give it a ride that's so important. In a similar fashion, when you bring deer together, when they're unnecessarily close together, that's facilitating that deer-to-deer contact, deer-to-deer spread of the disease. And that's something that we would like to minimize, the agency would like to minimize as much as possible. So in regard to baiting and feeding, the rule that's in place now is that outside of the hunting season, folks would not be, whether you're a hunter or not, you would not be able to put food out on the landscape to purposely congregate wildlife, not just deer, but any type of wildlife. Essentially, that's prohibited from January 2nd through the last day of August every year. There would be a couple exceptions to that. So your backyard bird feeder, cities that might be in the urban archery season in January and February are specifically hunters would be allowed to use bait in those circumstances, or other activities that are specifically issued a permit by the commission. I know down in Davie County, there's some USDA programs where they're trying to eradicate hogs. There's some trapping programs, some problematic feral hogs, that type of stuff could be permitted to continue. Mineral licks and salt licks, that's a little more complicated. There's multiple steps in the rulemaking process. That eventually here in the near future is going to be prohibited year-round, not just within the outside of the hunting season. So that's where that rule is headed. All right, so that's a little bit different than what you were telling you about how important it is to not concentrate animals. So why are we doing that? Why is the commission doing that? Well, keeping hunters as satisfied as possible, assisting with harvest. Harvest helps with sampling regimes and that kind of stuff. And it is an intention of the commission very much up front to preserve the deer hunting culture and the deer hunting tradition in this part of the state as much as possible. And so for right now, that's a good step forward. It may not stay like that in the long term, particularly if we change the surveillance area or something like that, but for the foreseeable, this season, that's what it is. In a similar fashion, there is a lot of risk with spreading deer urine deliberately out on the landscape, depending on where that urine comes from or other excretions from a deer. What James was showing you earlier is that very early in that infection stage, even before a deer looks unhealthy, those prions can be building up in the urine and other parts of the body. So we need to be real careful about hunters putting that out as an attractant to use for hunting. So within the surveillance area, you basically can't use anything that's collected from a wild deer. But what you can use is any synthetic product. Any product you buy in a store that's collected from a licensed facility in North Carolina, basically a licensed farm, cervid. Cervid is just the scientific name for the deer family. So any of those cervid farms that are producing a product, or any product that you buy off the shelf that's labeled as participating in that industry standard program called the Responsible Hunting Association, their deer protection program. So those things are all legal. In years past, if you harvested a deer in a surveillance area, you might actually collect urine from that deer. That's what this rule is designed to prohibit that risk to moving that around if that deer happened to be positive. All right, hunters really need to know that there are certain times and certain parts of the state where the agency has made it mandatory to have animals tested for CWD. So let's talk first about the primary surveillance zone. So the primary zone is that 5 mile zone in the northern part of Yadkin, and it touches the southern part of Surrey. So if you're hunting in that primary surveillance area, anytime you kill a deer during the black powder season or anytime during the gun season, there's going to be a lot of options for how to do that, but that's when it's mandatory. It's required at that time. It's not required in bow season in those areas simply because the commission has to put a lot of resources out there to make it where hunters can submit that sample. And there's just not a ton of harvest in bow season. It's a little bit different in the secondary surveillance area. So in the secondary zone, it's all the 2-week black powder season, and it's essentially the first week, the first 2 weekends and the week in between of the regular gun season. So basically the first 9 days of the regular gun season. So that was the voluntary times. Outside of those times, anywhere else in the state or any other time of the year, it's voluntary but highly encouraged. There will be options for how hunters can submit those samples. And that's really just all coming back to what James was trying to drive home earlier, that going forward, one of the questions we really need to answer is how common is it? How many infected deer do we have out there, and where are those deer living? Where is it concentrated? So a few more details about, we've been up here saying sampling and we've been saying testing. What are we really talking about? The tissue that's needed for that CWD test is the retropharyngeal lymph nodes. That's 2 small lymph nodes that are right there in behind the windpipe and the trachea, right where the deer's neck meets its throat. We've got a lot of different options for getting those. We'll get more into the details in a minute. The commission does not need the entire deer. All they need are those lymph nodes. We don't have to get it the same day that the deer was harvested. If you're going to use one of our drop-off freezers, like the one sitting here at the front, you don't have to take it the day you killed the deer. You can put it in your own freezer for a few days until it's convenient to get it there. It's a very small sample. Fits in this little jar right here. All the edible parts, all the trophy parts, all the rest of the deer can stay with the hunter just as normal. At that point, it's the hunter's deer, everything except for the retropharyngeal lymph nodes. That's all we need for testing. There's several ways that a hunter can submit that test, whether it's voluntary or mandatory. We're going to have within that primary zone, we're going to have 2 staffed check stations during that. That means our folks will be there at those 2 sites during the entire black powder and gun seasons. We've got, I think we're at least 16, maybe up to 19 drop-off freezers like this one sitting here in front that are spread across the district. Those are essentially 24-hour places where you can come, drop off the head, fill out a card, give us all the information, and at that point, once you put it in there, the hunter's done their part for complying with that rule. There's other options. We have a whole network of what we call Cervid Health Cooperators. That's folks that are working with us. We've trained them up on how to get those samples. They're meat processors and taxidermists. They're up to speed. They know what to do. They can do that for their customers. And that's another way that a hunter can comply with that requirement to submit a sample. So it's a free test. Hunter doesn't have to pay a thing for that. The agency and the state covers the cost of that test. We want that to get turned around as quickly as possible. We actually have to get those packaged up. There's some mailing time involved. They actually go to a lab that's out of state. It takes a little bit of time to get the sample result back. We're shooting to have results back and available to the hunter within 4 to 6 weeks. I hope we can do better than that, but that's what we're shooting for, and I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic we can do it that quickly. We'll talk more once we get into question and answers. What does that mean I should do with my venison for that 4 to 6 weeks? And the decision is up to the hunter what to do. But that's what we're shooting for in terms of time. Okay, last part we need to cover is talking about moving those high-risk carcass parts around. And we just you can't say that message too much, but we really don't want to give it a ride. And I'll tell you folks in the room, we're here in Yadkinville. We're very close to that primary zone place where we know it already occurs. But what I want you to know also is we've done these forums in other parts of the state. As we've done our messaging online, we're trying to preach to those folks to be aware that this is it's the biggest deal for folks that live and hunt right here in Yadkin and Surrey counties. And they should be very appreciative of trying to assist you folks with not giving it a ride to their area. So we're looking for a lot of support from other parts of the state as well. That's a big ask on our part. So a little bit of difference between primary and secondary zone again. So primary zone, essentially none of those high-risk parts that James mentioned can come out of that zone. So the highest risk parts again are where that prion builds up the quickest. Central nervous tissue, so think backbone and within the bones, within the urine, within the guts and blood, and those kind of things. That's where it builds up the quickest. Those are the parts that we don't want to move to another part of the state. So edible parts, cleaned up trophy parts, boned out meat, antlers, clean skulls, all those things are fine. Those are safe to leave. So we have to do some pre-game work, to understand what you're going up with before you harvest the deer to make sure you can comply with that. There's one exception to that rule. So basically, if a hunter kills a deer in that primary zone, the only things they can bring out is that list right there. The exception to that would be if that hunter is using a meat processor or taxidermist in Surrey or Yadkin counties, that's one of those servant health cooperators. They can take those deer parts to them if they've got them double bagged. Essentially, that's the only exception to that rule. So if you hunt in that primary zone, you killed a nice buck, you want to work with one of your taxidermists that's in Yadkin or Surrey that's a cooperating servant health cooperator, you can put it in a double bag and take it to them even if they were outside the zone. That's basically what that exception means. The secondary surveillance area, the rule was quite very much the same. If a hunter takes a deer, kills a deer inside of that secondary zone, the only parts they can take out of that secondary surveillance area are the boned out meat, clean trophy products, all that kind of stuff. I'm gonna leave that up, and then I see a couple folks snapping pictures. That's perfectly fine. That's on the website. I think it's in our Reg Digest as well, page 7. So yeah, that's what it is. So what does that mean for a hunter that's hunting in either the secondary or primary zone? What are the options? What can they do with those carcass parts? Probably the best one is right there at the top of the list if they have a way to do that. If they can bury those remains right there on the same property that they killed the deer, that's ideal. If they've got a backhoe, if they have a pit to do that in, that's great. If they have, if they live in one of the counties where they're convenient to a lined landfill, they can take it to the landfill and drop them off. That's fantastic as well. That gets it down under the ground when no other deer is ever going to come in contact with it. If they don't have those options and they're close to our staffed check stations that we have in the primary zone, we're actually going to have a dumpster there where they can bring it and drop those parts in the dumpster, and we'll make sure it gets to the lined landfill. Last case scenario is probably not the best, but it actually is okay. And that would be just to leave those parts, those remains on the ground where you killed the deer. Does it leave prions available to other deer? Yes. Is it still in a place where that deer's been living essentially all of its life spreading the prion already? Yes. So it definitely doesn't move it to a new area. It's not as good as getting it underground, but it's an acceptable way to do it. That might come into play. We've had some questions from folks that maybe hunt on game lands that live in another part of the state and just don't have a lot of local options. So that is an okay option. All right, I covered a lot of ground there. I know I saw a lot of folks writing on their cards and stuff. I'm going to take a break and look back to Jason and James. They're basically going to bring up that website and show you the details of how you can get the most up-to-date information of what all the stuff we're talking about.
All right, thanks, Chris. So, if you've got a question down on your card, if you would, just hold them up. We've got some staff that are going to be walking around to collect those, and we'll get them up front here. And Jason Smith, your District 7 biologist, and I are going to kind of, as Chris said, pull this website up and walk through it a little bit. Just wanted to show you what resources you've got available to you. And Chris mentioned pre-game. I think that's one take-home that we like to stress is if you hunt inside one of these surveillance areas, but particularly if you live outside and hunt inside one of these surveillance areas, make it part of your pre-game hunt routine, know what the options are, know what the rules are. We're trying to get as much information in front of hunters and the public as we can and provide as many options as we can for y'all to be able to comply with rules. And we get the samples that we need. So let me pull this thing up here. Real easy to get to, I hope anyway. So ncwildlife.org will take you to our main homepage. And once you land there, scroll down just a little bit, no CWD right there up front, just click on that. And that's going to take you to our CWD web pages. You got a mic, Jason?
I do.
Okay. You got your pointer? I got one here if you need. Okay. So, Chris and I threw out a lot of information, and, there's a lot of answers that are built into these web pages here. And our webmaster and our IT folks, Sarah Vandenberg, our wildlife health biologist over at the table, and Mariah Voss, our deer biologist, have just done a tremendous job of making that information very accessible and easy to find. So Jason and I are going to walk through all this, and I do want to make a point to say that, we've mentioned our CWD response plan, that's really guided our efforts and the steps that we've taken to where we are now. It is our hope that once we've had a couple of years to test a lot of deer and understand where the disease occurs and how prevalent it is on the landscape, that then we can move into a management phase and really dial this thing in to where the disease actually occurs. And so that is our hope, but it's too soon to tell what that will look like. So currently what we've got to deal with, we're going to talk about the boundary of the PSA and the SSA in some detail. So I'm going to pull these maps back up that Chris showed you just a little bit earlier, and Jason's going to walk us through the boundaries.
Yeah, I'm gonna start off by just basically walking you through the boundaries. And what I'm gonna start off with, what's pictured here, is the primary surveillance area. And Chris had mentioned that this was it's the smaller area, so it's based off of the 5 mile range, which is the average dispersal of yearling bucks. So how this particular area was determined was from where the first positive CWD case was in northern Yadkin County, and we drew a 5 mile circle around that harvest location. And of course, we couldn't expect y'all as the hunters and the public to follow a complete circle radius, so we had to find land features, major roads, and to delineate the boundaries that were very close to the circle that we had. Okay, I'm sorry. So anyways, I'm going to just basically walk you through the boundary. Right now, I'm going to start on the southwest corner of the primary area. And basically, this is in Boonville at the intersection of Highway 67 and 601. So the southernmost boundary of the primary area will follow 67 all the way over toward East Bend to Fairground Road here. And then it'll follow Fairground Road to Shady Grove Church Road, where it ties into Shoals Road, which ends up running into the Yadkin River. From there, it'll follow the Yadkin River to the Ararat River, and Ararat River up until the Quaker Church Road Bridge in Surrey County, and then it'll follow the Quaker Church Road up to Highway 268, and follow 268 west to 601, and tie you back into the point of origin, 601 and 67. The next area here we're going to focus on is the secondary surveillance area, and it's much larger as compared to the primary surveillance, which is, a little over 50,000 acres. We're looking at 1.8 million acres now. And as Chris mentioned earlier, this is, based off the maximum distance that a yearling buck could disperse. So again, we had to do the same thing. We buffered from the initial harvest location 30 miles this time instead of 5. And again, we had to find roads and geographic features to delineate the boundary closely to that radius to make it easier for the hunters and everything to follow. So I'm going to do the same as I did with the other one. For the secondary surveillance, I'm going to start down here in the southwest corner. And this is in Iredell County. Basically, I-40 in Iredell County, it'll follow through to Davie County line. And once it hits Davie County, it follows Davie County line to Forsyth County, follows Forsyth County boundary to Stokes County, through Stokes County boundary to Virginia. And then from there, it'll travel west and encompass the Stokes County boundary, Surrey County, all the way to Allegheny to 21. And once it reaches 21, it'll head south 21 to 18, through Wilkes County to 115, back to the northern Iredell County line. And once it hits the Iredell County line, it follows the Iredell County line back to the point of origin at I-40. So then the entire northern Iredell County is in the secondary surveillance area.
30 miles makes a big circle, and it puts a burden on a lot of people. It impacts a lot of people. We understand that, but we're going to err on the side of caution to really understand where this disease occurs, and then once we have a good feel for that, then we're going to dial it in. But we've got to cast a big net to start with. All the special regulations that apply to these two surveillance areas are listed here that Chris reviewed for us relative to natural deer attractants and scents, carcass transport, sampling timeframes, feeding prohibitions on wildlife. I'll mention the two flyers that you got in your information pack tonight are also listed here on the website, these two blue links here. So if you need to share those or look back at them, those are listed there as well. And I'm going to pull up this Carcass Transportation Act, and Jason's going to walk us through that.
So what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to start off, and whenever I'm talking about the carcass transportation, Chris had already mentioned, and this is going to reiterate, what can and cannot be transported. So basically, the whole deer carcass and carcass parts out of the surveillance areas are prohibited. But, of course, the following parts can be moved, such as completely boned out meat, so deboned meat, cake ties with no part of the skull or spinal column attached, antlers, clean skull caps in which no meat or soft tissues attached, of course, finished taxidermy products. And then in the primary surveillance area, if you do harvest a deer, you can double bag the deer or the head of the deer and take it out of the primary, as long as it's double bagged, and to serve your yak into a certified health cooperator that's certified through us, the Wildlife Commission, a taxidermist or meat processor. So what I'm going to start off with is I'm going to start off with the primary area, which is a smaller area. And basically, if you hunt in the primary area and you harvest a deer in the primary area, it's going to have to stay in the primary area. And I will go ahead and mention, we'll touch on it a little bit later, in the primary area, we're going to have 2 check stations, one in Yadkin and Surrey, and we'll have places for y'all to skin deer if you hunt in that area to give you the opportunity to get that carcass where you can take the legal parts out of the area and have disposal options there. But so basically, in the primary area, if you harvest a deer, it needs to stay in the primary. Now, I'm gonna step out to the larger area, the secondary area. So if you harvest a deer in the secondary area, it does not need to leave the secondary area, except it can be transported into the primary area. But so if you harvest in a secondary area, you can go to the primary, but you just can't move that carcass out to the non-surveillance area. So what's killed in the surveillance area is going to need to stay in the surveillance area. So the next thing, what if I hunt outside of the surveillance area? So that would be any of this area here. So if you harvest a deer, say over here, Guilford or Rockingham County, and you live in, say, Yadkin County, you can bring the deer from outside the surveillance into the surveillance area if you live there and work that deer up. And what happens if you, say, live over here in McDowell County and kill a deer in Guilford County and want to take it home? Well, you can then, you could harvest a deer over here in Guilford, Rockingham County, and you could haul it through the surveillance area. The one thing that you need to do before hauling is go ahead and register that deer where you killed it before transporting it through the surveillance area back to the other area. Basically, I mean, I know we can have more questions, but that basically sums up everything. Pretty good about the transportation rules for the deer carcass transportation within the surveillance areas.
Okay, so we're gonna back up to the main CWD page here. We're gonna talk about getting your deer tested. So you've gone out, hunted, you've been successful. I gotta turn my mic on. So you've gone out and hunted, you've been successful. How do you go about getting your deer tested? How do you get your heads submitted to some of our staff? And so that is addressed here under the Get My Deer Tested link. And there's primarily 3 ways to go about doing this. And Chris has already mentioned our drop-off freezer locations that we've got across the surveillance area, across the rest of District 7, and across the state. So those are available mostly 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we'll kind of show you how to get into that and learn what your closest station is, and if you want to utilize that option. If you have a chance to come up and look at the freezer here at the front of the room, it's got instructions on the top of it on how to go about submitting that head. I'll pull those up right here now. And so what we're interested in, again, is those lymph nodes here at the base of the neck. So we just need a couple of inches of neck on the head of that deer. We can't put a whole deer, we can put one whole deer in that freezer, but if we do that, then we can't get any more heads in there. So we just need the head of the deer. A couple inches of neck. If it happens to be a buck, please, remove the antlers above the skull and take them with you. If you leave the antlers attached to the deer, you're likely not going to get those back. So if you want to keep them, take them with you. So once you get that head off of the deer, there will be tags inside the freezer. Pull the tag out. It asks for information of your name, contact information, county you harvested your deer in, authorization number that you received from us when you reported that deer. And that's very critical. That's a unique number that is attached to every individual deer that's reported as being harvested in our system. And so that way we're able to track that individual deer through the system and testing process, and then post your test results on the back end. So that authorization number is absolutely critical. Fill that tag out, tie it around the ear of the deer. There's bags inside the freezer. Put the deer's head in the bag, tie it up, place it in the freezer, and you're good to go. So those instructions are listed there. They're also on the top of the freezer itself. The second option that's been mentioned a couple of times will be our WRC staffed check stations. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on those here in a minute. And then the third option that Chris and Jason mentioned is our Servant Health Cooperators. Really great partnership with a lot of people in the area, meat processors and taxidermists that are helping us to provide service in helping hunters get their deer samples submitted. And so we really appreciate their partnership in this effort. So let's take a little look through here at these three options on this interactive map. And so I'm going to zoom in here to the surveillance area and Yadkin and Surrey County specifically. And I'm going to turn off the Served Health Cooperator dots there. And so these dots on the map are the current locations of our CWD freezer locations. So Jason and his staff have placed out about 16 freezers. This one's being pressed in service tomorrow. We've got a few more on the way. So we're adding freezers more and more. So it's a very fluid situation. I just encourage you to rely on the website for the most up-to-date information. You received a printout of our current CWD freezer locations when you came in with the address and that information, but it's changing. It's pretty fluid, so I just encourage you to use the website to check on that as you get closer into your hunting time. So what we'll look at first, we'll scroll in here to Yadkinville, and we've got a freezer down here at the Yadkinville Shell Station. We can click on that, hit the little blue arrow there. It tells us the address of that freezer, where it's located, and it tells us what hours it's accessible. So this one's available 24/7. There are a few freezers across the state that have some particular hours of access where they're not 24/7. So again, make it a part of your pregame routine to know where you're going to go and when you can go. We'll also look in the primary surveillance area, and we'll look at Richmond Hill Nature Park. Got the address of that freezer location and the hours of operation listed there. Rockford, got a freezer at the Rockford General Store. I think it's actually across the street at the outdoor.
Yeah, it's across the road from the general store, but it is where the old canoe outfitter place was.
And then we got another one at the Siloam Recycling Center up in Surrey County. So several options there in the PSA, and then more broadly, Surrey and Yadkin counties there got multiple options. And again, we're adding more freezers as we can identify locations for people to host them. So we certainly appreciate all those businesses and fire stations being willing to work with us to hold a freezer for us. Chris, I believe, mentioned it already, but I'll reiterate it. You do not have to put that head in the freezer immediately. You can do it when it's convenient. If you can keep that deer head chilled, bagged up on some ice, you can even freeze it yourself. But if you harvest multiple deer, it's just absolutely critical that you can identify each deer individually. We have to know which authorization number goes with which deer. So I'll just mention that. But you don't have to take it immediately. You've got a few days to get it to the freezer. All right, I'm going to toggle off our freezers and turn on our Served Health Cooperators. And, before we dive into this, I'm just going to go ahead and say that, we have to be a little cautious about, these are private businesses. We have to be cautious about recommending one over the other, mentioning ones, not mentioning others. So we're not going to get into mentioning specific places and locations tonight. We'll leave that to you to get into later on when we have time to really dive in, pertaining to where you hunt specifically. But we've got a number of those places, meat processors and taxidermists that Jason and his staff have certified, and they're willing to assist you with getting your samples submitted. And then the third way that we talked about was WRC staffed check stations. So we're really going to have a lot of staff out in the surveillance area this year. We've got two check stations inside the primary zone, and Justin, you want to talk about what's going to be available there real quick?
Yeah, the two check stations in the primary zone, the one in Yadkin County will be at Richmond Hill Nature Park Law School area, and the one in Surrey County will be at the Siloam Recycling Center. And yeah, we'll have staff working there, and you can bring your deer by, and we'll pull the lymph nodes out, so you can get your deer tested, and especially during the mandatory testing period, you can bring it by there. In addition, we're going to be collecting other biological data off the deer age. We'll do antler measurements and different things like that. In addition, but yeah, at these locations, I mentioned to it earlier, but we're going to have a place where if you're hunting if you're coming in the primary area to hunt, and or even the secondary, and you don't have a way to work up that deer, we're going to have a skinning station at both locations. So we're not skinning the deer, but but y'all can be more welcome to skin the deer. We'll have water hoses so you can wash it down, and tables to work the meat up as well.
And I really want to give a big thank you to both Yadkin County and Surrey County, their board of supervisors, for allowing us access to these two locations. It was slim pickings, trying to find a place where we could come in, our staff could set up these stations, and hunters could bring their deer in, and we could, provide options for people to comply with these regulations. And, it wasn't looking good, but both counties really stepped up, and we really appreciate their partnership with this. Okay, and I will just mention briefly also here, we've talked about the check stations. So during the mandatory testing period, so in the primary zone, that's November 5 to January 2nd. In the secondary zone, that's November 5 through November 27th. So that's when we will have our staff out at these check stations during the mandatory testing period. And so those dates are listed there. The locations are listed where our staff will be. In the secondary zone, we have 5 stations. One is our Wilkes Wildlife Depot in Trapville, North Carolina. And then the other 4 are located at meat processors around that secondary surveillance area. So we appreciate them allowing us to come on site, set up our station, and provide that assistance as hunters bring their deer into those locations. So at the times our staff will be listed there, and they're kind of listed morning shift and then evening shift. That's how we got it there. I'll make a point to say that these are not hours of operation for those particular businesses that we are having these stations at. So if you are interested in taking your harvest there to get it processed or worked up, do not depend on these times and dates. You'll need to contact those folks directly. Okay, so we've talked about the regulations. We've talked about how to get my deer tested after I've been successful with my harvest. Now let's talk about how do I get my test results. And so you can do that online by basically viewing your harvest history. And so you click that box, it brings you this page right here, which is if you've ever registered a deer that you've harvested online, this is the pathway that you use to do that. And so you put in your WRC customer number and your last name. And when you do that, you will see this screen pop up. And I've just kind of run this little mock just to kind of give us an example tonight, so John Doe is in his WRC customer account, and if you had a harvest to report, you would do that right here. But what you want to do, if you're looking for your test results, is view my past harvest, this button over here on the side. And once you click on that, then it's going to bring you to this page. And so what we see here is John Doe's harvest that are associated with his customer account number. And there's that authorization number that I mentioned earlier. That number is absolutely critical to this. So each record is listed by that authorization number. John Doe killed a buck in Yankton County on November 15th, 2022, age 4.5. And then out here to the right is where those CWD test results will be listed. And so there's three options that you could see there. I've only got two listed here, obviously positive and then not detected. The third option is one that's inconclusive. And rarely we get that result back from the lab. But typically what's gone on there is that the sample was too degraded for them to actually run the test on once they got it out of the bottle and critical and started the testing process. So that is a possibility that you could see that, but it is very rare. Okay, so once you got your test results, then we've gotten a question quite frequently as to what would happen if I got a positive test result. So I'm just going to go ahead and throw this one out on the table. I don't know if we've got that tonight or not. But if you were to receive a positive result, and again, it's rare. We've had two. We've been testing deer for CWD for 20 years, and we've had two here in Yankton County. But if you were to have a positive, you would get a phone call from us. We would give you a call. We would try to understand a little bit better where in that particular county you killed that deer. When you report that, you just report it by the county. We need a little bit better understanding of where inside the county you harvested that deer. So we'd have a conversation about that. We would try to understand the pathway that deer moved. Did you clean it yourself at the house? Did the carcass go to a lime landfill? Did it go to a meat processor? Just try to understand the risk through that infected material in that carcass. And if you decided that you did not want to consume that venison, then we would take that off and have it incinerated, take care of it for you. That's totally your decision, or the hunter's decision. And as Chris mentioned earlier, our goal for getting those test results posted is 4 to 6 weeks. And then there were 4 tabs underneath those 3 buttons that we looked at, and just some good resources there. A lot of frequently asked question documents, those kinds of things. Safety precautions you can take on handling your carcass, cleaning your knives and equipment, those kinds of things. Got a lot of good information there. News and other resources. We got Mindy Wharton here tonight from our communications team. She's recording this and is going to post it on the website there under that link. So if you want to look at it later, or if you want to share it with friends, your hunting buddies, whatever, that information will be there. Chris, I think that's all I got, so I'll turn it back over to you.
Mindy, I got feedback here. Am I good if we talk from right here? Okay. So a lot of good questions on the cards. I'm going to hand a couple to James. We'll let him take a break for a second, though. Jason, that's probably a good one for you. James, maybe read through those, and in a second we'll let you answer some of those. I'll start on a few of these. So one really good one on top. Somebody asked, is it possible to have a testing facility on a college campus here in state, perhaps North Carolina State University? Actually, that is in the works. The new Troxler lab is going to have the capacity to do that in state. We were hoping to have that up and running this hunting season. We might actually have some of it by the end of the hunting season, but it's not quite ready to go yet. We do hope that will increase the turnaround, or decrease the turnaround time for getting test samples back That's a very insightful question. Let me hit on one or two more, and then I'll turn it over maybe to somebody else. Will there be more freezers? Yes, there will probably be more freezers. I think we're at 16 now. We'll be at 17 when this one's deployed tomorrow. Check back on that website as we get new freezers, as we position them out there across the district. That will be the most up-to-date place to find information on freezers and check stations. Okay, then there's a couple of questions here that I want to kind of lump together about, can you bring in essentially just the lymph nodes and not the rest of the deer? Are the resources available to show you how to collect those lymph nodes? And then just some questions about what sample needs to be brought in. The lymph nodes is the most important part. Some other states, I think some of the western states actually have instructional stuff where they sort of direct the hunter to pull just a lymph node to get it in. We may actually get to that point in North Carolina, but we're kind of learning to walk this year before we learn to run in the future. Technically, yes, you could do that. And if you're super 100% confident that you know you're getting the right thing, that is a potential option for somebody to do that. I would encourage you maybe to not go quite that far this year. If you want to learn how to see that thing pulled, if you want to mount that animal yourself, I think that was the context of the question. Maybe someone's wanting to do their own mount. You know, if you harvest it during that mandatory period, just bring it by one of the check stations and we can do it right there elbow to elbow with you, help you pull that sample, and you would potentially know how to do that in the future. So technically, yes, you could do it that way, but it'd probably be better if we could work within the methods we've got set up this year. All right, I'm going to pass it off down here to Sergeant here for that answer.
Okay, somebody had a good question. When referring to double bagging, what kind of bag do you need to use? Just a good household kitchen garbage bag we find if you're doing a head sample. If you're choosing to bring the whole deer and to bag the whole deer, probably go to Lowe's and get you one of the 55-gallon drum trash liners would be perfect.
So I'm Sarah, I'm a wildlife health biologist. I had a question which was mostly answered by James, but just to clarify a little bit, was if I have the deer tested, will Wildlife Commission tell me whether it was positive or not detected? We will. Via the website is the easiest way to do that. We're working on some other means to let people know electronically, so if we have your email, we may be able to, we're working on that, hopefully shortly. When I get results in and upload them, to be able to immediately have that turned around and sent to you. But as it is right now, as soon as the results are available, they are on your big game harvest report. That bit is as instant as we can make it. The other question was, how long does it take to do the test? I think is I'm understanding the question. It can take from the lab up to 10 days. And so we have some turnaround time on our hands between getting a head into a freezer, getting it out, pulling the lymph nodes, getting them all boxed up, shipping them. That takes a little bit of time. And then on the other end, once the lab has done the test, it takes them a bit of time to make sure it goes all through their records properly and is sent out. And so that's why we're looking at several weeks, 4 to 6 weeks. It can happen quicker, so don't be overly surprised if you do see them sooner. But also, if you don't see them for a month, it's okay. We still have to wait a little bit. The other question I have is, how does it affect humans? Well, I guess good news at the moment is that CDC does not believe that it does, but we're not sure yet. We don't know what the future will hold. This has been on the landscape for a long time. It's been known about since the 60s. It's been in wild deer since the 80s, and as of yet, there's been no documented cases of chronic wasting disease in humans. But it is also the recommendation of the CDC that you do not consume known positive deer. And that's just to keep prion diseases out of the food chain and out of human consumption. Because while we don't currently know, we don't want to find any positives. That would be really bad news for everyone. And so if we can avoid consuming that meat, then you can sort of avoid the disease as best you can. And that's what we know about it so far, at least in terms of CWD and humans.
So the question I got here is concerning our Jawbone voluntary mail survey, in which if a hunter harvests a deer and they want to find out the age of They can get a Tyvek envelope from us, and they can send us the jawbone, and we can age it, and we send the results back to you via the report card. So the question is, do we still need to do the jawbone male survey? So my answer to that would be, is if we get the whole head via a meat processor, or if it comes to our check station, we're gonna be able to age that deer because we're gonna have the whole head and jawbone, so you don't need to resubmit that jawbone for that. But if you go through one of our certified service health cooperator as a taxidermist, they're actually pulling a lint nose, and we only get those lint nodes from them with the required information, with your name, authorization number. So we don't actually get the jawbone to give an actual age. So with that aspect, once they mount that deer, you could get the jawbone back from the taxidermist and still submit it through our jawbone melting survey.
Yeah, and, thanks for all the past help folks in the room have provided over the years in that jawbone survey, that we really understand a lot more about our deer herd, about how old the deer are, about how productive it is from that survey. That's a really good effort. I'm going to follow up on something Sarah said there about the testing. We're hoping for turnaround time 4 to 6 weeks. The priority for turning around testing of samples is this surveillance area. It's this part of the state. If you're submitting a sample from within the surveillance area, that's getting fast-tracked. That one gets in the box, it goes first. If you're hunting in Halifax County or Pender County down east somewhere where, yes, we're still sampling other parts of the state, it's part of our routine surveillance, but those don't get the priority to get the test result back as quickly as possible. So they're probably looking at 8-10 weeks down there, turnaround time. We'll just say longer than 4 to 6. We'll just say that. The priority is up here. We had a good question here. How many deer have been tested so far? It depends on how you frame that question. We've certainly had several dozen samples that have come in during bow season voluntarily. If you look over the last calendar year, our surveillance effort that resulted in those two, I think we had considerably over 7,000 for the entire state. A lot of those were here locally. If you look all the way back to the first sampling we did as part of surveillance back into the early 2000s, we're at, I think, close to 23,000 samples. So the likelihood that any individual deer comes up positive is relatively low, but it doesn't mean we don't need more samples here locally. All right, James, you got something?
Okay, had a couple that were similar, so I'll try to tackle those together. Do infected does have infected fawns? So if the doe is infected with CWD, is her offspring also infected? And the answer is it can happen, it does happen, it depends on the disease progression in the doe. So if she's got that prion lobe built up and has had it for a number of months, then she will pass that on, or can pass that on to the fawn. And then the fawn has it from day one. And we tend to see that happening in popular deer herds where those prevalence rates are pretty high, 25% prevalence and above. That kind of prevalence in the disease, you've got a lot of deer carrying it and passing it on and dying, a lot sooner than they otherwise would have. So, yes, that can happen, but it doesn't always happen. Does it kill off all deer that has it? So yeah, the disease itself is 100% fatal. So if a deer contracts the disease and that infection sets in, they will succumb to the disease. It may take some time. We know it takes time, but eventually they will die from this disease. Why not testing during bow season? Chris addressed that during his talk a little bit. It's kind of a numbers game. As he mentioned, it takes a lot of effort for our staff to be out there tending the freezers, working with processors and taxidermists to get these samples. In our response plan, relative to the volume of deer that come through during archery season, in our response plan, it gave us sample targets that we needed to be able to answer the questions that we needed to answer. And so the mandatory testing period is really kind of geared around what those sample numbers are. Chris mentioned we did 7,000, a little over 7,000 statewide. Jason and his crew did about 1,300 here in District 7 last year. Our goal this year is triple that. So that's, we can achieve that given the dates that we have the mandatory testing requirement. But we need people to submit their samples, get those hits to us. So that's why we didn't include bow season in that. We feel good that we can get the numbers we need just during black powder and gun season. But as Chris mentioned, we certainly encourage people to, get their deer tested voluntarily and look at those options to do so. How long for test results? That's been handled. Okay, so here's one. Can farmers kill deer year round? And I'm gonna look over at Sergeant Lyons here and say, so long as there's crops in the field and they're experiencing damage and they have that ability to do that, that deer carcass cannot leave that property under that scenario without a depredation permit to go along with it. If they let the carcasses lay, should they bury it? That, as Chris mentioned, that would very much be preferable, that those deer carcasses end up underground and cannot be contacted by any other deer. So if that's an option, that is certainly preferable. But the main thing we don't want it to do is leave that farm. I think that's all I got.
That's what you mentioned, that we're working with those farmers.
Great, yes, thank you. So in the primary surveillance area, and Jason and our enforcement staff have been working with a lot of local farmers here that do apply for depredation permits during the crop season. And if they are issued a depredation permit, it is mandatory that they also submit those hits for us in testing. Hence that second positive result that we got back in the summer. During this deer season, again, only in the primary surveillance area, we are providing additional tags for hunters inside the primary zone to apply for additional tags. They're CWD tags, so if your goal is to harvest more deer on that particular area, it is certainly our goal to test as many as we can. And so if you hunt inside the primary surveillance area, if you own property inside there, please grab Jason or myself after we're done, and let's talk about that if you'd be interested in it.
Thank you, James. I think I've got two more on this card here. One was, will this be on YouTube? The answer to that's yes. This is actually the fourth forum we've done. We did one here back in May. We did one 2 weeks ago in Winston-Salem, one last week in Wilkesboro. This one's being recorded tonight. Those are all going to be available to rewatch through our YouTube channel. If you have trouble sleeping tonight, just want me to drone on and go listen to it again. In addition to a lot of the information that James showed, yes, those are available through YouTube. And there was a question about blue tongue, and that's a great point to kind of circle back to that. James touched on that in the beginning. Deer are like lots of animals. They can get lots and lots of parasites, lots and lots of diseases. Chronic wasting disease is one of a long list. It's probably the most troubling one on the deer list. The other one that most hunters have encountered, have some familiarity with, is the hemorrhagic disease virus. One of those is called blue tongue virus. That's the common name that folks know it by. Blue tongue virus is very common throughout the state. This has been a rather active year that we've had this year. Tends to crop up in late summer, tends to crop up in really hot summers. It's driven by a biting fly. It is a virus. CW, chronic wasting disease, is not a virus. You see, it's very different. Blue tongue virus, a deer oftentimes is dead within just a couple of days of getting infected, dies very quickly, but the herd itself survives and rebounds quite quickly. CWD is the one that a lot of folks have not heard of other than it's something out west, but the long-term prospects for CWD are much more somber. Blue tongue virus has probably been around as long as there's been deer. Did we have any other questions on cards? If you jotted something else down, hold it up, one of our folks will get it, or just wave your hand if you got any follow-up questions. Yes, sir.
Yes, if you see a deer that you think has CWD, real skinny and stumbling around, do y'all, suggest that we shoot that deer and dispatch that deer?
So, I'll look at Sergeant Lyons while I answer a little bit. So there's some differences during season, after season. You know, you're a little bit less legally able to do that outside the season. If anytime you see a sick deer, even before we had chronic wasting disease, you know, I would always ask folks to contact our staff quickly. If you can send us a trail cam picture, if you can snap a picture, there's a lot of things that some of our disease experts like Sarah over here can actually diagnose from a picture. We get hydrocysts, we get lots of stuff, and we might say, no, we kind of know what that is. Give that deer a chance to recover. Scenario now, if somebody's got a deer that looks sick and bad, probably when you get in contact with us, we're going to say, yeah, we would really like to investigate that deer closely, and we'd like for you to collect it, shoot it, harvest it, you know, get it on ice or get it in a cool spot quickly for us to come get it. So the answer is probably going to be yes, but we kind of looking at Sergeant Lyons, you know, we kind of don't want folks to be making that decision without some involvement from the commission staff.
Yeah, I think
I think as long as it's in an area where you can lawfully hunt and the deer is in season and you can harvest that deer, we would definitely want you to, outside of where you got permission to hunt or outside of the normal season, try to make contact with one of us as quickly as you can. Some things can be done over the phone, but you know, myself, some of the other enforcement guys or any of these biologists may be able to come out and take a look at it. So I think to be on the safe side, in season, in an area you can hunt, yes, go ahead and harvest that deer, but outside of those parameters, play it safe, call one of us.
it still needs to be turned in on the harvest card, correct? Correct.
Other questions? Did we miss anything? I'm also looking at our green shirts and stuff too.
I had one question with, is not detected the same as negative? The answer to that is actually no, it's not. But you might see this in your own lab reports when if you get blood work done at your doctor's and they're looking for something, you might see not detected pop up from time to time. What that means is lab speak for, we don't think so. It means nothing in that sample indicated that the test was positive. And that's about as good as we can get. We can't really, from a lab world, declare that the animal was negative without going through and looking through every single piece of that animal, and that's just not feasible. And so we look at that lymph node where we know those prions build up the quickest, and then there are samples taken from that in a few different places, and they're looked at, and it's decided from then on. And so, I guess effectively not detected is similar to negative, but it doesn't mean the same thing. It's not a total declaration of that animal is free from CWD. It means the sample that was looked at, which we use samples where it would build up the quickest and it would be visible the soonest, it was not detected in that sample that was submitted. That's what that means.
I'm going to follow up on that real quick too, because I've been confused in the past. So if a hunter is waiting to get a test result before they, out of abundance of caution, before they choose to consume that venison, absolutely what they want to see on that website is not detected. That essentially means you're free to eat the venison if that's what you're waiting for. All right, James has got one on the card, and then I saw some hands back here.
Okay, can skull cap be cut off, not antlers? So the regulations do say antlers attached to a clean skull plate is good to move outside of the surveillance areas. So that means you can cap that, but it has to be free of any soft tissue or any fleshy material. So that's, again, just out of an abundance of caution, trying to keep that material inside the zone.
Okay, I see two hands there at the table right back there. Yes, sir.
The main purpose of cutting all the meat off the bone is why. It's, yeah, I mean, I understand that it's in the spinal cord and everything, but I just don't get it.
You're right. So the prion that causes the problem, it's not a virus, it's not a bacteria. If it were, we could kill it, but it's not living to start with. It does not reside equally throughout the deer's body. Can it be anywhere in the body? Yes. I mean, it potentially is in the edible parts, hence the recommendations for having it tested before you eat. But it's not equivalent. Some of those parts have the highest buildup, and the bones, the spinal tissue, some of those type of things are the riskiest parts to be moved around. So that's the reason for only allowing those parts that are somewhat safer to be moved.
So if any of that, if it tests positive whatsoever, all of it needs to be thrown out.
Well, at that point, it's your decision.
But it's not edible, in other words.
It's still,
Would
it's,
anybody in here eat it if it come back positive? Any game wardens or anybody?
so,
Anybody eat that meat if it was positive?
People could eat it for years.
But fire don't kill it.
but we got folks that are broadcasting live, so we'll try to stay in one place here. So I'm a really good wildlife expert, reasonably good. These folks might tell you different. And we've got good enforcement officers in the room, with the exception of Sarah here, who is our wildlife health expert. We don't really have any human health experts up here. So we won't quite step over the line to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. We will point you to the recommendations of those folks that are those human health experts. And if you want to rely on their advice, that's great. If you don't, it's still your deer. If somebody wants to consume it, they're certainly welcome to. If they ask an opinion, I was talking with Captain Bullins earlier, if they want to know what most of us do, most of us are going to be cautious. And, if we get a test result that says positive, well, lost that deer, you're probably going to dispose of the venison. But ultimately, it's the hunter's decision to make that. Yes, sir. And I see a hand right here. Yes, sir.
You kill the deer, you tag it, you report it. Okay, you take it and get it tested. Alright. You go on and have your meat processed. Test comes back positive. Who processed the deer? What do you tell them?
You talk about home processing, you took like the commercial process.
Take it somewhere.
We would not, the commission would not necessarily know where you had that deer processed. If we received a sample through one of our Servit Health cooperators, we would probably chat with them and let them know that one came through their facility.
Well, their blade has cut your deer, your positive deer up, has cut everything else since then for 6 weeks. What effect does that have?
Processors have some guidelines that we recommend. Sarah might want to touch on for, how to clean in between deer if you're doing your home process, and how to wash your own utensils, clean in between deer. But ultimately, it's a business decision on their part. It's not anything that's regulated by the commission. I would say that the risk of deer-to-deer contamination there in a lot of settings is pretty low. It's all about risk management. We had a question that, a really good question at one of the meetings in Winston-Salem the other day about, if I'm hunting and wear my hunting boots in the surveillance area and I'm walking around where deer spread these prions, do I need to worry about taking my boots back home and walking into there? It's one of those questions where theoretically, yes, there's potential risk there, but it's all about risk management and trying to touch on what are the riskiest stops there along the way. So in the processing example, is there some risk, some potential for spread there? Would depend on procedures. Yes, there would be. But is it the most risky thing to do? Probably not. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm a processor, and I just want to make sure that I understand when it comes from secondary, it has to be boned out, is that correct? Before I can process it, or does it, or?
No, so the transport to is your facility within or outside the secondary zone?
It's in the secondary.
Okay, so if you're in the secondary zone, you could accept a whole carcass deer from anywhere within the secondary zone. And from anywhere outside what was the green zones, other counties outside the area could come in and bring you a whole deer. Yes, sir.
What about primary?
If you're not in the primary zone, they could not bring it to you. Yes, sir.
That answers it 100%.
Well, are you in Surrey or yet?
Sir,
So they can double bag.
Are you one of the Servit? Okay, so if you're not one of the Servit Health cooperators, they would not have the option to bring it to you. But you could certainly get trained up, work with Jason and get trained up and be a certified health cooperator if you want to do that. We'd love to work with you.
Love to be certified.
Okay, hey, there you go, excellent, thank you. But yes, if you're within the secondary zone, any hunter in the room that's hunting elsewhere in the secondary zone, they could put their deer in the back of the truck and bring it to you to have it worked out. Yes, sir. Great question. How about any of our, looking at Captain Bullins, Sergeant Lyon, we're missing anything that needs to be mentioned? I appreciate everybody coming out on Tuesday night. Long time, got one hand over here. Yes, sir.
So worst case scenario, you talk about prions lasting for decades and all that. What if we were hit hard with this? What would be our outcome? Is there immunity built up through the herd, or we're looking at
You know,
die off, or?
decades down the road, with advents in science, you know, who knows what the situation might be like 20, 30, 40 years from now when we know more about chronic wasting disease. But what we do know at this point is that it's not going away. It'll be here forever. It will reside within the deer herd. But at the same time, good case scenario is we're still going to have a deer hunting culture here. We're still going to have good deer hunting. It won't be it'll be different than what it was, but we'll still have it for a long time in the future. Yep. See another hand back here? Yes, sir.
You say it's been around since the fifties and sixties?
It was first diagnosed in the western U.S. in the late 60s, yes, sir.
And it has never posed a threat to a human? That-
There's no known cases of,
Okay.
correct, that's right. There's no known cases of a human being infected from eating a CWD infected deer, correct. Which probably be pretty good reason to make you sleep better at night a little bit. Yeah. Okay, looking around, I'm not seeing any hands. You know, I'll just kind of close this up by saying this is, you know, I've worked here in this part of the state, had the good fortune to work here for a little better than a decade and a half. You know, it's home to me. I hope this was a topic we would never have to address here. I tend to be somewhat of an eternal optimist. I know we got some growing pains in front of us. This is, you know, it's going to be a difficult year. You know, James and Jason and their team are putting a bunch of stuff into place. And I can tell you without a doubt, as the commission has considered all these rules, there is certainly a recognition that it's an inconvenience and frustrating for the hunters as well. We haven't, there's been a whole lot of ideas that we've not moved forward simply because it was going to be, you know, a lot of trouble for not much gain. So we've tried to focus on the ones that we think will really help us get to the best place we can be, which is not a perfect place, but it's a lot better than some other states that came first that had to learn by trial and error. So I'm optimistic that we'll still be in a good place in the future. All right. I think we're done. Appreciate everybody coming out. Travel safe.